Well, greetings, imagination connoisseurs. Once again, it is I, your sommelier of sci-fi, your duke of dope discourse, your chancellor of cheerfulness, your master of fun and wonder, your existential Mr. Rogers, Robert Meyer Burnett here, Robcasting from the Robservatory to you imagination connoisseurs, to you who make up this, the Post-Geek Singularity community. It is a very rainy Friday the 13th this day, and I don't think anyone is at Camp Crystal Lake, and even if you were, you couldn't be because it would be closed. I love Friday the 13th. I don't know the etymology of where that superstition came from. I know that's not quite the correct use of the word, but still, I don't know where that came from. I mean, the lucky number, unlucky number 13, Friday the 13th, all of those things. But it is a Friday. It is the 13th of March. Beware the Ides of March. We've got Friday the 13th and the Ides of March coming in. What can I say? No tears for Caesar, am I right? It's great to talk to you today. LA, it's supposed to rain in Los Angeles for like the next week, which is very, very rare. What I love about it is I'm in charge of taking care of we have landscapers here, but we have a vegetable garden and there are trees, and I have to water them and take care of them. There's a French apple tree in the backyard, and the dogs have been tearing up the lawn, and because we try not to water it, but now all the grass is coming up, and I love it. A lot of interesting things are going to happen tonight. Of course, I want to announce that tonight I'm going to bring a show. I think it's going to happen. It's going to happen probably 3 times a week, and it is a show where I'm going to be on at 8 o'clock Pacific time, 8 o'clock tonight. I'm probably going to do it Monday, Wednesday, and Friday now, and it's going to be Elizabeth and I. I don't know what we're going to call it, but we're going to be drinking wine, and we're going to discuss a movie that she has not yet seen that I showed her. And last night I showed her a movie, and about 15, 20 minutes in, she wanted to turn it off. She was very angry with me. She wanted to know why I was showing it to her. And I said, no, just stick with it. It's not what you think it is. It starts out one thing, it's going to turn into something else. And while I'll let her tell you, but she did stick it out. And at the end, she... I don't want to tell you what she thought, but let's just say her reaction to the movie pleased me, and I couldn't be happier. Now, ladies and gentlemen, it happened. It happened today. Second Sight out of the UK. Second Sight Video. Hang on, let me call this up. I was remiss. Second Sight Films in the UK. Let's see if they even have it up on their site. You know what? They didn't, but they tweeted it out. As everyone knows, George Romero's Dawn of the Dead is one of my favorite movies of all time. I have had a fetishistic attachment to collecting Dawn of the Dead in all of its various forms. I still have my chrome Laserdisc box set that had both the Argento cut and Romero's theatrical cut, in addition to a booklet that has a blueprint of the Monroeville Mall where they shot Dawn of the Dead. And one of my most eagerly awaited physical releases of all time is the HD and 4K, the 4K release of Dawn of the Dead. Now, you might ask, well, Rob, how many copies of Dawn of the Dead do you have? What's the big deal? Well, the big deal is Richard Rubinstein, the producer of Dawn of the Dead, had not allowed any companies. Look, I've got the European box set with the 4K Nicholas Winding Refn restoration of the Argento cut of Dawn of the Dead. What I want is the theatrical cut, which I still believe is the most superior version of the Dawn of the Dead, and I want Romero's director's cut, his extended version. But producer Richard Rubinstein had been sitting on the original elements. And as anyone knows, when you are making a 4K version of a movie, the best version you can get, the best way to do this, is to get access to the original negative elements, so you can make the best version of the film possible. They didn't do that even when they made the 3D version of Dawn. They should have color timed it first. Anyway, Second Sight was able to convince Richard Rubinstein, probably with a lot of cheddar, I don't know, but they have access to, in fact, Dawn of the Dead. And they've been working on this restoration. They have one of the best people in the business working on the transfer of it. I am very, very, very excited. I'm always excited when things are done right. there's a lot of video companies now, they can't afford it. It's very expensive to go back into the negative and do things. So it's very, very exciting to get Dawn of the Dead. And they released the information, and why it's not on their website yet. They have not obviously updated their website, but they were going on Twitter. I did put this on my Instagram, so maybe I can find it. Let's see. Second Sight Films. Let's see what they say. Second Sight. Here it is, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to read it. Here's what they tweeted out at 8 o'clock this morning. Hang on. As I'm getting my phone out of here. Romero's Dawn of the Dead and Martin. Limited editions will be released October 26th. Wow, apropos. Dawn of the Dead to include 3 versions available in Blu-ray or UHD formats. Pre-order on our website March 27th, and more news on Martin to follow soon. And they have a picture of the box. I hope this is the box. It's the classic helicopter zombie head and the logo that was on the one sheet. When there's no more room in hell, the dead will walk the earth. My God. I have to tell you, to me, I had a physical reaction to this. Blood flowed into my loins. I felt my nether regions expand with delight. And, for as old as I am, it's not as easy as it used to be to do that. Although I must say, everything still works pretty damn good. But when I saw this, I can't tell you how good I felt. I'm very, very excited to live in a time when this awesomeness is going to happen. Also, as you all know, I am working now directly in tandem with director Dave Parker on our special features for The Hills Run Red, and he and I have been exchanging pieces and working together to make sure, and it's been very exciting there too. So not only will you get Hills Run Red on Blu-ray, but you're going to get this great Dawn of the Dead set. Support physical media, support them, because wow, you guys, I'm all ghibli for this. Let me just tell you. I know. I mean, I've got how many copies of Dawn of the Dead? I know. But I still get Elizabeth. I'm sure she'll even mention on our show tonight. We don't know what it's called yet. But tonight at 8 o'clock Pacific time, Elizabeth will be talking about, I will say this, it's a genre movie from a famous director. Not like famous like Francis Ford Coppola, but in genre circles, certainly, and I've spoken about him a lot. And I won't say anything. I'm just going to let you tune in and find out what it is. It should be an entertaining hour, and it begins at 8 o'clock Pacific time. And that's me and Elizabeth drinking a bottle of wine, talking about one movie. I'm sure the conversation will be freewheeling. You can send us in questions if you want, or whatever, and we'll answer them. And the questions don't have to be about the movie. I mean, the whole point is to drink wine. The movie's just a jumping off point. I'm sure it will be an interesting show. We'll see how it goes. She says to me she's worried that she's not a talker, and I said, I know, but you don't have to be a talker. Now, today's show, it's funny. Every week, the conversations that I have about Star Trek Picard on Twitter, they get more and more. Like, I talk about the show, and people come at me more and more. It all becomes personal. Like, I'm always I'm old. I don't know what's up. What do I know about Star Trek? It's all very, very funny. I think it's very, very funny that nobody offers. Like, I don't get a lot of counter arguments. Let me tell you why I like this show. But there's a lot of things going on. But it got me thinking about what makes a good story. Like, what is it about storytelling? What do I, and especially as a genre fan, what to me, why is it that I do not like certain things but like others? Why do I give certain things a pass and not others? So I was thinking, like, maybe I should look into this. And of course, our good friend Google, all you have to do is figure out, like, what subject do you want to talk about? And I was like, I don't know, I typed in, what makes good genre storytelling? What makes it up? And lo and behold, all you have to do is punch that in, and you get lots of answers. So before I read it, let me put my glasses on here. My reading glasses, these $5 cheap pieces of plastic. I'm going to read this article to you, and it was on Standout Books Publishing Services. Now, I don't think I've ever found this, but Four things every good sci-fi story needs. And here it is, ladies and gentlemen. Here it is. I'm going to read it. What makes for a gripping sci-fi story? Aliens, super advanced human technology, portals, time warps, war on a galactic scale? Yes, but it's not simply the fantastic elements themselves that suck us into these fictional worlds. There's something skillful going on in compelling sci-fi that we can learn from and assimilate, pun intended, for use in our own writing. Number one, ladies and gentlemen, and in my mind, number one with the bullet. They might as well have called this verisimilitude, but in this case, authenticity. Let's see, by the way, is there an author? Oh, yeah. I don't know who wrote this. Maybe it's at the bottom of the article. Number one, authenticity. Building a technologically advanced future world is one of the most thrilling and complicated parts of writing a sci-fi story. It can seem like anything is possible, that the whole universes or universes are open to you, bound only by the limits of your imagination. In a sense, that's true. You could arbitrarily make up a whole slew of cool gadgets, but is that good for your story? Is that helpful for your writing? Experience suggests that fans and writers alike are most satisfied when the fictional world, its technologies, cultural aspects, and themes reflect a believable future trajectory born out of our present reality. Readers have incredible powers to suspend their disbelief, to buy into the rules of the fictional world, but first the writer has to earn that trust. Even the most outlandish idea in a sci-fi story, if given a plausible foundation, can work. That's the key, though. Skillfully laying the foundation of your future world so that readers can buy into those fantastic elements of the stories. By the way, right underneath this, it says we've been voted one of the best websites for authors in 2016, 2017, and 2018. So there you go. John Scalzi's Old Man's War, which, by the way, is a great book that I read, believe it or not, because of Mr. Alec Peters of Axanar fame. He waxed rhapsodic about this book, and I read it because of him. John Scalzi's Old Man's War is a great example of this concept. When you hear that his protagonist is a 75-year-old man joining the army to fight for and defend human outposts in the galaxy, you may be tempted to roll your eyes. But the story does a great job of laying the technological groundwork. The colonial defense forces have developed the ability to transfer human consciousness into a bioengineered younger version of a recruit's body created with their own DNA. It's not only a unique story concept, but adds an extra dimension to the character landscape of the story. You've got old, wizened geezers in new superhuman bodies, but it works because Scalzi's built a solid framework. Is your future technology a little outlandish? Does it need a stronger foundation to be plausible? How can you use character dialogue, strategically placed exposition, flashback, or writing techniques to lay the groundwork for your awesome tech innovations? By the way, I'm going to post this in the live chat so you can see it because there's a lot of links that I'm not going to read, obviously. 2, complexity. If you're looking for stories to completely transport you, sci-fi is a great place to start. The genre is known for its sweeping epics, many of which have mastered this aspect of craft, the complexity of the fictional world. Having an interesting story concept is important, yes. Constructing a unique world is important, absolutely. But if you want to create a masterful narrative that comes alive in your reader's mind, take time to build a complex, multi-layered world that is intricately involved in the characters' experiences and the motions of the plot. Ask yourself, what historical events led to the present condition of your world? What are the hallmarks of popular culture? What is the state of music, art, literature, and food culture? And do they affect your characters' daily interactions with other people or their environment? How have advances in technology affected those aspects of culture? Considering these aspects of your world as part of your world-building process will create a textured and unique setting that will hook and delight readers. Now, as you might understand, or you might see where I'm going with this, these are pretty, I would say, they're not exactly hard concepts to grasp, but they're very important, especially when you're writing science fiction. This article goes on. Take Dune. For example, Frank Herbert was a master of world building. The world of Dune is immensely complex, from the ecological framework of sandworms and the precious spice melange, to the entangled Atreides-Harkonnen feud, to the ambitions of the Bene Gesserit sisterhood, just to name a few. Herbert takes his time exploring the culture, religion, language, and history of his fictional world, so much so that it becomes inextricable from the plot and motions of the characters. That complex storytelling, and it commands a captive audience. Nuance. As far as genre conventions go, sci-fi and fantasy have some of the longest standing, most well-established tropes and character types. These can be helpful to a point. When trying to outline the relationships of your characters, define your plot structure or understand the scope of your story. But if you find that your characters, plot points, or other aspects of your narrative are cliche or derivative, it's time to do some more work. Tired storylines and shallow characters are a quick way to lose a reader, and they rarely make for strong writing. So, how can you turn cliche into nuance? Go deeper. Add definition. Tease out hidden possibilities. Brainstorming, journaling, interviewing your characters. There are many techniques to try. The point is to find a method that works for you and to do the hard work of giving your cliched story elements more depth. It will pay off. I promise you. While it was the prose that captivated me most in David Mitchell's recent novel, by the way, I read this book, it's great, The Bone Clocks. The book is also a great case study for nuanced characters. There's Holly Sykes, a mouthy and rebellious 15-year-old who runs away after a fight with her mom, but she has a history of psychic encounters that reappear with a vengeance when she strikes out on her own. Ed Brubeck, a classmate of Holly's, is a loner who doesn't have any friends and shows no sign of wanting any, and yet he's the one to stop by on his bike to keep Holly company the further she wanders from home. Holly soon discovers that Brubeck isn't a mute oaf whose dad went to prison for assault. He's got a head full of trivia and is saving up to travel to Europe. It doesn't take much to turn a cliche into a sympathetic character, and the effect is well worth the effort. What facet of your character lies just beneath the surface that, when activated, will spark a powerful turn of events? What counterculture thing does your character believe? What dream or desire or obsession sets him or her apart from their friends? Meaning. Number 4, finally, speculative fiction lends itself very well to exploring themes. They're often hidden beneath the surface of the more thrilling and fantastical elements of the narrative, making their moments of revelation all the more powerful. And a story with a message is one that lingers in the minds and hearts of our readers. I don't mean to suggest that you always should be writing a story as parable or allegory, only that if you have something to say, don't be shy about it. I read Fahrenheit 451 in middle school. That was a long time ago, but to this day, I have a very vivid memory of Guy Montag and his journey to preserve knowledge in a world bent on annihilating it. Ray Bradbury's protagonist is a fireman doing his duty, observing the rules, but all the while indulging in a complex interior life that drives him to find the truth. The story is vibrant with Bradbury's view of a future world, complete with wall screens, a robotic dog, book-burning firemen, and a looming nuclear war. But it's a world bursting with meaning whose lessons are up for interpretation. What message beats at the heart of your story? Are you exploring ideas about science, religion, politics, and culture that will resonate with or challenge readers? Sci-fi novels tell us some of the most thrilling tales, and scaffolding on which they're built can give us valuable lessons about how to deepen our own writing. How has examining the aspects of authenticity, complexity, nuance, and meaning changed the way you see some of your favorite books in the genre? Which of these are you struggling with in your own progress? Let me know in the comments. So I found this, again, this article was 6 years old on a website I was unfamiliar with. So I found this after a cursory glance, and I'm going to put it into the live chat stream here. So check that out and look at the links. And, you know, this obviously is an author website. And I was like, but it certainly applies to screenwriting and teleplay writing if you're writing for TV. And it just got me thinking, and then lo and behold, what happens? But an article drops. Again, found this on Dark Horizons today. Michael Chabon, who wrote this week's episode of Picard, a Pulitzer Prize winner, and who's also a winner of a Nebula and a Hugo Award, he talks Picard backlash and growth. Here's what Michael Chabon had to say. Patrick Stewart famously said in the lead up to the new show premiering that he had no desire to simply redo Star Trek The Next Generation, and if he were to come back, then the show had to grow and change. This week, showrunner Michael Chabon spoke with IndieWire and agreed with that assessment and says Picard is very much its own story, even as he understands the desire to revisit the past. This is what Michael Chabon says. We had a commitment to telling the story of how time changes people and how 20 years can put you into a completely different place that you never would have imagined. What show is that? Anyway, as a fan, I share that desire to go back and to have it be the same and to want more of what I already know and love. That sort of inherent conservatism, not in a political sense. I just meant there's a lowercase c conservatism in a fan's heart that says if you already know you love something, why would you want it to be different? That's from Michael Chabon. If you already love something, why would you not want it to be different? And I read that and I was thinking to myself, it's not whether it's different or not. Because if you think about Star Trek, especially like the original series and Next Generation, it was basically an anthology show. It was different every week. You never knew what kind of a story you were going to get. And indeed, the stories focused on even there was the main characters. You didn't just, yes, the show was pretty much, if you look at it, it was very Picard, Data, Worf-centric, really, over the 7 seasons of Next Gen. But you also got stories about Deanna Troi or Geordi or Dr. Crusher. I mean, maybe not as many, but still. But what was interesting to me is I really think that there is, at a creative level, for the people that are making the shows, I think they underestimate a lot of the time their audience. And certainly hearing Michael Chabon say, I just meant there's a lowercase conservatism in a fan's heart that says if you already know you love something, why would you want it to be different? Well, what's interesting, using myself as an example and using Star Trek as an example, I've loved Star Trek my whole life, but it's always been changing. I mean, the original series became the animated series. The animated series became the motion picture. And the motion picture showed our characters in a place I'd never seen them before. They were all not happy. They were in a place they didn't want to be in. And then, of course, over the course of the film, yes, it brought those characters back together. But I was fascinated as a fan and loving Star Trek as a 12-year-old when the motion picture debuted, and I saw my characters in a different place than I'd ever seen them before. I found that fascinating because I understood why they were there. I really got it. I mean, Kirk had been behind a desk when he wanted to be out hopping galaxies. Spock had finally gone to Vulcan. He was undergoing the Kolinar discipline. By the way, again, world building, I'd never heard of the Kolinar discipline, nor had anyone else because they made it up for the movie. But the idea that there was a Kolinar discipline that was supposed to purge remaining human emotion, or not just human, but any emotion. If you're an emotional Vulcan and you choose to go the course, I mean, that speaks, there's lots of courses that people take to purge whatever they have in them that they want to change, whether it's AA or whether it's therapy or whether it's just taking extended adult education courses. You want to learn something, you want to change, you want to be better. Spock was doing just that. I found that compelling. I'd never seen that before. And then he failed. He failed achieving Kolinar. Not only did he fail, he got dissed by the Vulcan masters. Now, this was something I had never seen before, but it felt right. It was really well presented. I bought into it. I'm like, wow, man. And this was not something I had seen before. This was not something that I had this was not storytelling conservatism. This was me as a fan watching this and embracing it and being amazed by it. And watching how these things played out over the course of the movie was amazing. And yes, by the end, we had our family back together. But that was at the very end of the movie. The entire film was showing characters in a place and doing things and feeling things and espousing things that I'd never heard before. And it was very different from the Star Trek that I knew and loved. And I think a lot of people did not like the motion picture because I guess they found it slow and boring. But at the core of the motion picture for me was seeing these characters that I knew and loved being so different from the way I had seen them before. That's what made it compelling, because it was new and interesting, but it felt real. I believed all of them in the positions. Like, I got it that Kirk wanted to be, head of Starfleet operations was not where his head was at. And he regretted the decision. He regretted being there. Just like McCoy regretted at first coming back aboard the Enterprise. He didn't want to be there. Certainly Spock didn't want to be there. And the only reason that Spock, it was great. The only reason that Spock went back to the Enterprise in Star Trek The Motion Picture was for totally selfish reasons. I mean, they were like un-Vulcan. He didn't care. He wanted to be heading that way. And I loved all that because it was different and new and interesting, but it was presented in such a way that I felt it was realistic, and it made the whole movie far more compelling. And a lot of people talk about, I understand, if you, and the reality is, I think that what I have understood is people enjoy things on many different levels. And my level of enjoyment for Star Trek is, I think I'm a lot harder on it than a lot of people are. I think that as the franchise is considered, I spend more time thinking about episodes than maybe a lot of people do. It's easy for people to watch and be entertained and be like, okay. And it's funny because I'm always, it's the thing that I'm told, by the way, this at least 5 times a week. Well, if you don't like it, why do you watch it? Well, it's like being a fan of a sports team. If you're a fan of a sports team, you're not a fair weather fan. If they have a terrible decade, you still watch hoping they're going to do better. That's the way I've been with Star Trek. And it's been fascinating. For me, it's been a fascinating lesson to watch the creative team. And let's face it, the creative team for Star Trek has, whether it's J.J. Abrams or whether it's Alex Kurtzman, it's still the people that have controlled the franchise for the last 10 years. It's still the same core group of people that all know each other. I consider it to be the J.J. Abrams era of Star Trek because it began with him, and his compatriots and collaborators are still in charge of Star Trek. So we are getting a certain team in place. But I feel that way about a lot of the franchises that I love. But I find it interesting that people's response to me is like, well, if you don't like it, then don't watch it. And it's like, I don't have that ability. Like, I don't have that. I'm interested to see what they do. The funny thing is, the entirety of the existence of Star Trek, it's Roddenberry left he wasn't left. He was sort of replaced as the executive producer of third season. He was only intimately involved with Next Generation. He was there until he died in 91, but he did set up Next Generation, but then he sort of, because of his health and his age, kind of pulled back. And it's always been changing. When, of course, Ira Behr really took over Deep Space Nine because Michael Piller and Rick Berman and Jerry Taylor were busy developing Voyager, we got something new. I mean, the Michael Piller, basically the Berman era, but it was Michael Piller who took over the third season of Next Gen and gave it its direction from seasons 3 to 7. So that was definitely Piller's influence. And then you had Ira Behr, who had only worked on one season of Next Generation, take over Deep Space Nine and shape it. That was different. These creators were not, they were not giving us the same kinds of things. And Voyager was different. And then everyone talks about how when Manny Coto took over on Enterprise for the 4th season, it became the show it was always supposed to be. So there were different phases within the Berman era, and we saw different creators that were all able to work within this framework. And I thought it was really interesting. Now, there's another article where Damon Lindelof, and for those of you, again, Damon Lindelof is part of this same group. Now Michael Chabon, Damon Lindelof, Alex Kurtzman, and J.J. Abrams are all part of the same extended family, I guess you would call it. But Lindelof was talking about it, and he was speaking to fandom this week. And Lindelof was asked about Simon Pegg's comments the other week, which put a damper on the prospects of more big-screen Trek due to the movies costing nearly as much as Star Wars to make, but generating only about 1/3 of the business. Lindelof says he's more optimistic because he says by being less audience-appealing, the creative freedom it allows could keep the franchise chugging along for decades. This is what Damon Lindelof said. I feel Like, there's a wide breadth of ways to attack Star Trek, and you cannot deny that very few things have a 50-year half-life. There is something about Trek that resonates, and while it may never be Star Wars or the Avengers, I still think it's important. Those are important stories to tell. Good for Damon Lindelof. He also goes on and says, I think that doing something in the Marvel Universe, anywhere in the Marvel Universe, would really be potentially exciting for me, especially as they start to get a little bit more experimental. Some of the things that I've seen for WandaVision, for example, just feel like, okay, now we're getting somewhere, particularly in the television space. And at some point, but certainly not in the immediate future, I feel like I would love to do something in the Star Wars universe, maybe a decade from now, when I would no longer be blamed for ruining it. That would be a hoot. I mean, it's very interesting that I think the common thread that I see with these creators is, again, they want to change what Star Trek is or Star Wars is or even the Marvel Universe. They want to do something different and make it their own, which I understand. I completely understand, but that's why I felt like Star Trek the Motion Picture, even though it was a Gene Roddenberry production and he did write a lot of the script, he was still able, even Roddenberry was able in the framework of Star Trek to do something new and unique on movie screens. And they could have gone the more crowd-pleasing way, but they didn't. And I really believe that, sure, is the motion picture, let's call it deliberately paced? Yes. Yes, it is. But, and I feel that's what most people respond to. I think that when people immediately, the motion picture is written off, oh, it's the slow motion picture. Well, okay, it's just different. You know, it's really different. And for me as a kid, even at 12, I saw that movie 11 times. I think it was 11 times in the theater. No, I think maybe it was 13 times. I saw Star Wars 11 times. And I kept going back, and I was fascinated by it because it was different. And people say, oh, it's a remake of The Changeling. Well, superficially, yes. But what was going on with the characters was totally different. And I feel like if you go back to this article about storytelling, which I really think is valuable, I really think it was definitely a great, great article, that it's something that was definitely worth watching or reading or thinking about, or making it something that is definitely worth, I don't know, talking about. Yes. And then there's another article, and this article that I found that I thought was great. This was actually from 2012, and it was on Forbes. And I thought this was great. The Science of Storytelling. And this is by Steve Denning. He was a senior contributor, and he writes about agile management, leadership, innovation, and narrative. Why storytelling? Steve Denning writes. Simple. Nothing else works. That was the rudimentary answer that I gave to cynical left-brain managers back in the 1990s and early 2000s when I was introducing them to the power of leadership storytelling. Slides leave listeners dazed. Prose remains unread. Reasons don't change behavior. When it comes to inspiring people to embrace some strange new change in behavior, storytelling isn't just better than the other tools. It is the only thing that works. A more scientific answer can be found in Brian Boyd's wonderful book on the origin of stories, evolution, cognition, and fiction from the Harvard University Press. This elegantly written book assembles a mass of scientific evidence, drawing on evolutionary theory, ethology, linguistics, artificial intelligence, game theory, anthropology, economics, neurophysiology, analytic and experimental philosophy, epistemology, and psychology, and shows scientifically why storytelling is so important. The eclipse of storytelling in the 20th century. Anthropologists always knew that storytelling is a universal feature of every country and every culture, even if, for most of the 20th century, storytelling got very little respect. As so-called scientific approaches to life became dominant, mechanistic, machine-like thinking was everywhere triumphant. Analysis was king. Narrative was seen as either infantile or trivial. The phenomenon didn't just affect storytelling. In retrospect, the 20th century can be seen as a giant experiment by the human race to find out what could be accomplished if organizations treated people as things and communicated to them in abstractions, numbers, and analysis rather than through people-friendly communication such as stories. Employees became human resources to be mined rather than people to be minded. Customers became demand or consumers or eyeballs to be manipulated rather than living, feeling human beings to be delighted. Storytelling was only one of many elements that suffered collateral damage. The whole experiment can be seen as a success to the extent that the material standard of living of a proportion of the world's population for a time improved. But the experiment was an abysmal failure in most other respects. It made human beings, people, miserable, and organizations steadily became less and less productive as the need for innovation grew. In any event, the effort to suppress storytelling was unsuccessful. Storytelling, though despised, lived on in the cracks and crevices of society, in the cafeterias, the corridors, around water coolers, in bars and restaurants, living rooms and bedrooms. Throughout the 20th century, storytelling got little respect, but it could not be suppressed. It turned out to be the central characteristic of being human. It also turned out that storytelling was a central component of leadership. Want to understand why Ronald Reagan, Margaret Thatcher, Bill Clinton, or Barack Obama became national leaders? A big part of it lay in their ability to tell effective leadership stories. Now, the ongoing reinvention of management to transform workplaces from the boring, sterile, dispiriting cubicles of the 20th century into the lively centers of inspiration and creativity that are needed for the creative economy of the 21st century has storytelling at its core. Why are stories so powerful? Boyd explains what it is about the apparent frivolous activity of storytelling that makes it so powerful. He helps us see why storytelling is central to innovation, the critical performance dimension of 21st century organizations. Stories are a kind of cognitive play, a stimulus and training for a lively mind. Although it is not always obvious from what goes on in Washington, D.C., Boyd argues that humans are hyper-intelligent and hyper-social animals. By lining up key elements of intelligence, cooperation, pattern-seeking, alliance-making, and the understanding that other beings have beliefs and knowledge of their own, stories make us stronger and more effective as a species. For Boyd, story is a thing that does rather than a thing that is. I love this. It is a tool with measurable utility rather than an object for aesthetic admiration. Attention is the reward that listeners bestow on the storyteller, or the movie maker, I would argue, or the television producer. Boyd analyzes successful stories to prove his point. The second part of the book zeroes in on two famous stories, two works of fiction, Homer's Odyssey and Dr. Seuss's Horton Hears a Who. Come on, who doesn't want to read this book now? Boyd mines the Odyssey not so much for its beauty or its meaning, but for its sophisticated treatments of survival and reproductive success, particularly issues of cooperation within social groups. The instinct for justice compels listeners to attend to the horrible punishment of Penelope's freeloading suitors. For Boyd, the Odyssey is about the acceleration of intelligence in the interests of preserving the social order. Odysseus is deceitful yet honorable, because his cause is just. Boyd's book is engrossing and deftly reasoned. It assembles a scientific evidence which explains why some stories speak to audiences across cultures and generations, which is what I was talking about in terms of Shakespeare a couple shows back, maybe 2 weeks back, I don't know. The most successful storytellers apply themselves to the listener's dilemmas, not just to amuse, but to make them fritter to triumph in the contests of life. As Laura Dietz points out in her review, Boyd welcomes contradictions, expecting and even celebrating conflicting agendas within a given work. Just as reshaping the human pelvis for walking on 2 legs made it less able to cope with childbirth, so new forms of story generate their own new sets of problems, which require yet more solutions. Boyd looks at stories as a naturalist looks at a leaf or a shell, not criticizing improvisations, but marveling at their inventive beauty as a refreshing experience. By assembling the science that underlies effective storytelling, Boyd helps restore storytelling to the intellectually respectable and organizationally useful role that it merits. Let me tell you, man, I love this. I totally agree with it. As somebody who's been studying storytelling my whole life, here I'm going to put this link in the article here so you can read this, and go to the link and find that book. So here you go. There you go. By the way, that was on Forbes, 2012. So anyway, again, it just reiterates, I've said on the show many, many times, and people have commented on it, that one of the things I've always loved about movies, even when I was a little kid, I recognized this. When you walk into a movie theater, there are people from all walks of life, all shapes, sizes, colors, creeds, sexualities, religious beliefs, genders, or however you identify. You all come together in this room, and you can sit right next to somebody that you might be completely at odds with in the real world. But you're all together in this one room, and you sit down, and you're willing to put aside any differences you might have with your fellow audience members. You sit down, and all of your attention is suddenly focused up on a screen. And you're watching a story unfold. And it hits you in a personal way, in a unique way, but it becomes a part of you. And I believe, I had a girl that I dated, and she always would give me a hard time about how many novels I read. And she's like, why don't you read nonfiction, or why don't you read history, or why don't you read, which I do, but I love novels. I love stories. And there's a truth, when you're reading a good story, because what is, say it with me now, what does a great story have more than anything? It has verisimilitude. You believe it. And it has a verisimilitude. Look, Horton Hears a Who has verisimilitude within the context of the universe that Dr. Seuss is creating within the pages of that book. Every book, every story that you tell reinvents its own universe. It creates its own universe from scratch. Sometimes, of course, it relies on your knowledge of the real world, and you have to understand what it's like to live in the real world. But if you have a fantasy realm, if you have a cyberpunk future, it has to establish that as well. It has to give you the rules. Whether you're watching Blade Runner or Ready Player One or Children of Men, whatever. You're watching a movie about the future and the world that it's telling you the story of, it has to explain that and make you believe. And everybody, like sit in a movie theater, you just open up your mind. And that storyteller, the authors, the people that worked on that film or watched the TV show, if you're going to watch the TV show, they have to make you believe. And a TV show has to make you believe every single episode. Because if suddenly a character doesn't do what they're supposed to do, or not what you think they're supposed to do, but if they do something that within the universe of that film or TV show seems wrong, then you as an audience member, you're not going to believe it. And if you don't believe it, then the story fails and you're popped out of it. And for me, I won't go into reviewing Picard or Discovery, but when you read interviews with people like Michael Chabon, or you read about with Damon Lindelof, these are people that they want to broaden the canvas of Star Trek, I think. But the problem is, rather than take it in a direction that's brand new, they're falling back on old, really cliched tropes. And I think I find that interesting that science fiction's a hard genre, and it requires you to have a very three-dimensional way of looking at the universe, and you can't write science fiction. What is the first thing that this article on stories, on storytelling, what was the first thing that you would find? You have to set up the world. You have to make people believe. And the world, you have to think about all the entire world. And I think that's really where Star Trek Picard and modern Star Trek has really let us down, beginning with the 2009 Star Trek movie, is they have not reestablished the world. And I mean the world that we don't see, because the world that we do see is informed by the world that we don't see. And you have to understand, you have to be able to answer 1,000 different questions about the world that you're setting your story in. And all the great fantasists, whether you're writing science fiction, fantasy, or even horror, all of that whole world is taken into consideration. You know the answer. You know what's going on in culture. And I feel like part of the reason that I find modern Star Trek so unsatisfying is I know that work hasn't been done. they haven't gone out and filled in the backstory of their own world and allowed that backstory to inform what they're writing. I know it, and you see it come through in all the storytelling, and that's the kind of thing that bothers me. And anyway, not to belabor the point, but that's kind of what I thought about. That was what I was thinking about today. I was thinking about it on the John Campy show as I was coming back here. I'm like, hey, I want to talk about storytelling, not necessarily because I didn't want to be like Debbie Downer. I'm the chancellor of cheerfulness, after all. Come on, man. I didn't want to be like this guy going, oh, woe is me. There's enough. It's very interesting. I feel like there's a lot of it's not just in storytelling, but it's even in our political arenas. I feel like our politicians are not thinking three-dimensionally. They're not thinking about the wider ramifications and the world around them. They're very myopic in terms of what their agendas are, what they're trying to accomplish, and they're missing the larger picture. Because now it's all, let's forward our agenda so we can get reelected and all that. But how do your decisions? It's very funny. I tweeted a list of things that Donald Trump had said over the last month about what's going on with this outbreak all over the world. And it's really interesting to watch or just to read these statements over the last month. I put it on Twitter. I didn't compile it, but it was really interesting to read because if there was more of a holistic approach from the get-go, and there was more of this is why I think we need leaders that, maybe our politicians we should require them by law to take like a month or two and just travel around the country. Like go to all 50 states and go like, I don't know, hang out at 7-Elevens and talk to people, or go to restaurants, just go meet people and talk. Because, the United States is a pretty big country. And I know we want to say, hey, we're all Americans here. But anybody who's traveled around the country knows that wherever you go, New Orleans is a vastly different realm than Los Angeles is. And Los Angeles is a different realm than Chicago is. Chicago is different from Portland, Maine, or Portland, Oregon. And everybody's different than New York City or Miami or New Mexico. Or Utah or Wyoming. And I feel that across the nation, we have so many different needs that we have wherever we live. Like I have a friend, this girl I know, she grew up in Seattle and I've known her for a long time. She just upped and bought a Wild West or an Old West ghost town in Montana. Just sold her house and moved there. And she's been renovating this place and she's been turning it into a bed and breakfast. And they shoot there. They shoot movies there. They shot a film there and they just debuted it in Montana. And it was a big to-do. And, I follow her on Facebook and they've been hit heavy with snow and they have wolves coming to their door. It's crazy. But she made it an entirely different transition, went from one life to a vastly different life in the last 2 years, and it's been pretty amazing to watch. But while I haven't had a long conversation with her, we just talk back and forth through Facebook Messenger or whatever. She's had a totally different life, and it's made me just realize just how vastly different one's concerns can be over the space of just a few months. Really, she goes from Seattle, living in a house in Linwood, to going to owning a ghost town in Montana. I mean, and so what she needs from her life is very different, and yet she's still an American. She just moved a couple of 100 miles east, and life changes. And I just feel like if people knew the stories, if we told the stories, that's why I want everybody, you got to listen to everyone's stories, because that's how you learn, that's how you focus, that's how you understand. And we as Americans, we need to do more of that. Like one of the things that's really bothered me about this whole the way people have been acting here, the whole thing about it's become a joke, but everybody buying all the toilet paper. I mean, who was the person that bought the last roll of toilet paper? I mean, maybe that was you got that last roll and that's all you got. But I'm thinking to myself, where's the civility? I mean, I don't ever want to be the person that takes the last cookie off the plate. I don't want to take the last swig of whiskey from the bottle. I want to leave it for the last person. There's, if you never take the last cup of coffee unless you're going to make some more. And I feel, I don't know, that's just me. But anyway, storytelling, got to listen to it. What makes it good? And the storytelling is very, very important to the human condition. It's the best way to convey information. It's the only way we can understand each other. Anyway, what do you guys have to say? Let's jump into that and find out. Let's find out where anybody is here. 10 hours ago, Zachary King sent in a tip and said, Rob, I loved your rant yesterday. Would you say that Picard has reached manifest level of lunacy? No, but I'll tell you, no. For those of you watching my beloved Manifest, boy, episode 9 didn't disappoint. Man, oh man, oh man. Woo! Kudos to you guys again. No, it has not reached manifest levels of lunacy. It's just reached levels of disappointing. It's just disappointing. Do you know what the most disappointing thing to me about Star Trek Picard is? It's not about Picard. I mean, it started out being about Picard. It started out, you kind of got to see where he was at, disillusioned with Starfleet. He's basically become a secondary character in his own show. What does he want now? You know, okay, we're going to go solve this. He's along for the ride, but what are we learning about him as a character? Now he's doing what we would expect him to do. He's now part of an adventure that he's going to facilitate and help solve. So he's back to normal. In a way, Star Trek the Motion Picture, when Kirk wasn't where he wanted to be, Spock wasn't where he wanted to be, McCoy got pulled away and he didn't really want to be there, but he managed. The character of Jean-Luc Picard in his 10-episode Picard series, I mean, I know we're going to get a second season, the character of Picard is making no growth. We've been waiting the whole show for him to become the Picard that he normally was, and then he became that Picard, but he's like in a secondary position. And people could say, well, Rob, you just said that Star Trek the Motion Picture, Kirk wasn't who he wanted to be, and then he became Kirk. Well, the thing is, yes, that's true, but the focus was on Kirk. You know, the focus was, now we're meeting all of these secondary characters that I keep waiting. I'm like, okay, the focus of the show, now that you've got, I think, 7 of 9 and Picard and Marina Sirtis and Jonathan Frakes and even Brent Spiner, you know, the funny thing is, it's because it's Star Trek. The new characters, they've not done a very good job establishing these characters as being at all compelling. They're all just amalgamations of things that we've seen before. But really, I want to see, you know, what does Patrick Stewart want more so than, oh, Starfleet's lost its way? That's not what Picard wants, though. And I feel that the great weakness of the Picard series is he's involved in this plot, but it's not really about him. You know, it's not, the show is no longer about him. It's all about the plot. And it's not about him as a character. So look, the one thing about Manifest is ridiculous. And it defines my problem with the impossible premise. They can never solve it. All they can do is get more outlandish to the point where you just throw up your arms and go, whatever. But it knows what it is. It's not disappointing. It's not like somebody going, hey, you know what? We saw the first season of Manifest. Now we're gonna try and change it around. It's just become more and more outlandish as it's gone along. Because it had to. Because there was no way you could ever really tell what was supposed to be happening, but that's fine. Willow sends in a tip and says, I know you prefer to see all movies in theaters, but are there movies that you feel really don't hold up very well when they aren't on the big screen? For me, Gravity and Dunkirk weren't nearly as epic when I watched them at home. Willow, I think that you're absolutely right. That's why they're movies. Gravity, I have a 3D Blu-ray of Gravity, and when I play it on a Thunderous sound system, it's great. I can enjoy it, but there was nothing like seeing that movie on a big screen in the theater. I mean, it's your breath catches in your throat during the entire time. You're absolutely right. And I think those movies, Gravity is a movie that it's pretty brain dead when you think about it, if you know anything about science, but the way they set it up, it's like, I equate Gravity with Crimson Tide. A friend of mine who was a submariner that worked on nuclear submarines once told me that he didn't like Crimson Tide because of how non-authentic it was. And I was like, dude, I don't care. Come on. But for him as a submariner, he cared. With Gravity, since I know something about stellar mechanics and space and what's it like to be in orbit, there's a lot of stuff that I was like, meh, but I could also go with it. And Dunkirk's not the same in that sense. Dunkirk was amazing, and on the big screen, it's because it was immersive. You might as well be standing next to the main characters, or you're experiencing what's going on with them. I mean, it was so effective. But you're absolutely right. I mean, I think Gravity and Dunkirk were not nearly as epic. And, there are movies, those are really, really good examples. I would say Apocalypse Now. I mean, I love Apocalypse Now, and I watch it a lot, but it was far more effective on the big screen, as I think, a lot of movies are more effective on the big screen. But Lawrence of Arabia, another movie that works like gangbusters. I think Jaws, even though you can watch Jaws on TV and it's fine, there's something about the framing of his shots. They just work much better on the big screen. It's not like they don't work well on TV, but you watch, whether it's Jaws, whether it's Raiders, whether it's Empire of the Sun, even Catch Me If You Can. Spielberg movies have an artistry to them, and they work much better, I think, on the big screen when the images are larger and more enveloping and are just come around you. Even Stanley Kubrick's movies, even though he didn't really use the widescreen frame in his films, they're still, like Barry Lyndon is far more unbelievable when you're watching it on the big screen, because basically what Kubrick was doing was recreating on film still paintings. And what was really interesting, if you look at Barry Lyndon, if you watch Barry Lyndon, there's a lot of these slow zooms, and they zoom out. They'll start on someone's face, they'll zoom way out, and then they become a painting, a tableau. And it very, very interesting film. I really love Barry Lyndon. But yeah, that's why I think most movies are better when you watch them on the big screen. Bunyan Snipe sent in a super chat and said, Friday the 13th was when the Knights Templar were betrayed and massacred. Oh, really? I didn't know that. I love the Knights Templar. I love Tombs of the Blind Dead. I hope they come back. I didn't know that. That's really interesting. Well, thank you for that, Bunyan. Swack Props sent in a tip and said, unlike episodes of the original series in Berman-era Trek, which I can rewatch many times over the years, Picard and Star Trek Discovery just aren't as rewatchable, not only because of the bad storytelling, but also the serialized nature of the binge and forget format. Yeah, I mean, it's pretty interesting. I think you're right. I don't necessarily know. I don't mind long-form Star Trek storytelling. I mean, it can work. We saw it work really in the latter seasons of Deep Space Nine. My problem with these stories is that they're just not that interesting. I feel like the Borg cube, as I said, they've been shooting it. They've been shooting it in like this set they keep redressing. Like it's been 3 rooms that we've seen. There's no scope to it, and poor Space Legolas still fighting the same corridor, now wondering if he's going to get assimilated. But yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Binge and forget. I just think it's not. Every episode of Breaking Bad to me, I could see it as it was almost like a story unto itself, but it furthered the narrative, and I feel like that's not this Picard should have been 4 episodes. This series, it should have been. It's so lethargically paced, and it literally is people just in rooms talking. It's like, what are you do? What are we doing? Is anybody doing anything in the show? I don't know. Mukbang Reviews sent in a super chat and said, how many copies of Invasion of the Body Snatchers do you own? Are there any differences and special features, etc.? Well, I can actually answer that question. I have 2 copies. Actually, no. I have 3 copies of Invasion of the Body Snatchers on Blu-ray. I do, now that I think about it. I have the original MGM version that came out. Then I have a British UK version, a UK steelbook that's pretty cool. It's white. I think Arrow put that out. And then I have the Shout Factory, the Scream Factory version that they put out with the O-ring, the cover, the slipcase. And to be honest, I think there are different special features, certainly from the different special features from the MGM. Everything was ported over. I don't know what the difference is between the Arrow version and the Scream Factory version, but I think there's more stuff on the Scream Factory version, but they're all different. So yes, I have 3 copies of it. This is Philip Kaufman's 1978 version. And I have the original as well, the original version of from the 50s. But I can't tell you. I'd have to go look. With my collection, I don't know them all. I don't know them all from the back of my hand. Darth Poncho says, I love Romero's Night of the Living Dead and Day of the Dead. I could never get into Dawn of the Dead. Please explain what is wrong with me. Well, Darth, I think I might be able to have, I think I can give you an answer. I think it's the tone and the look of the film. First of all, Night of the Living Dead's in black and white. And Night of the Living Dead feels like the beginning. It's a classic horror movie. The same way you can watch it like the Universal Monster movies. It opens in a graveyard. They're coming to get you, Barbara. Look, there comes one of them now. You know, there's that great scene where Barbara and her brother go, I guess, visit their parents' grave or something, and you meet the first zombie. But because it's black and white, and then the music, it's mostly library music, but the music is playing. It feels like, when you think, to me, you can either think, when somebody asks me about classic horror movies, you know, you could think about the Universal Monsters, or you could think about things like I Walk with a Zombie or Cat People, you know, the Val Lewton vibe, or Eyes Without a Face, Les Sans Visage, I think. I don't speak French. By the way, another Criterion disc, Eyes Without a Face, get that. Oh, by the way, another hint about tonight's movie. There is a version of it. We did watch the Criterion Blu-ray. So for those of you who are in the know, I'm not going to say what movie it is, but we did watch the Criterion Blu-ray. And I think so. Night of the Living Dead exists out of time. It's black and white, so you can look at it as a classic horror film, but it does pack a punch, and it is relentlessly downbeat. It has a irresistible premise in that you have a group of people. It's a siege movie. You know, it's a siege movie. Like Assault on Precinct 13 is a siege movie, Rio Bravo or something. But it's a siege movie. You have a bunch of disparate people holed up in a house with the zombie hordes outside. It's got an irresistible premise, but it's a siege movie. It's scary as hell. And I think that's why you can like it. Day of the Dead, if you look at it that way, it's also kind of a siege movie. You have a group of people that are trapped in an environment. They're trapped in a bunker, an underground bunker, and you have the scientists versus the military. So that's interesting, and everything that's going on. And that's a very serious movie. Both Night of the Living Dead and Day of the Dead are relentlessly serious. There is not any humor to be found. Whereas Dawn of the Dead, the beginning, I love the opening scene in the TV station where society is falling apart. There's a talk show they're filming that's being broadcast live, and the opening in the TV station of Dawn of the Dead it's showing you within the TV station how civilization is crumbling, you know, and I've always loved that. And then of course it cuts to the SWAT attack on the tenement building where they've been keeping their dead bodies, and because they still believe there's respect in dying. The people of 107 will do what you wish now. Let me pass. I could do a one-man stage reading. I wouldn't even have to read. I could just perform Dawn of the Dead from beginning to end. I probably could do it. I mean, I would get in trouble and I would probably get a copyright strike, but I could actually, I swear to God, I could do it. That's how much I love Dawn of the Dead. But I think that Dawn of the Dead is wildly divergent in tone. It doesn't feel, it starts out like a horror movie. And then when it gets to, these rednecks are probably enjoying the whole thing. You hear this crazy, weird local band country song, and the movie moves away from the main narrative, and you literally spend time watching this group of rednecks that have gotten together for, like, they're hanging out on a Sunday or Saturday. The world's going to hell, and they're drinking beer and shooting zombies. I mean, that it becomes humorous. There's elements of humor, and of course, the whole movie, ultimately, Dawn of the Dead, is a satire. It really is, even though it's horrific and all that. And I've always liked the scope of the movie, but it wildly changes in tone. And I think that the zombies, of course, they're more stylized. It's just not as, I think it's if you want pure horror, Night and Day are just very different tonally than Dawn is. Dawn goes from horror to satire to out-and-out comedy. I mean, there's literally a pie fight in Dawn of the Dead. There's literally a pie fight when a biker gang starts throwing pies at zombies. And I think that it's just a different kind of a film. JB, so by the way, there's nothing wrong with you. Here's the thing. I want people to understand. Just because I love something like Dawn of the Dead, if you don't love Dawn of the Dead, that's perfectly okay. You know, I saw Dawn of the Dead at a very, I guess, impressionable time in my life. Again, Dawn of the Dead and Star Trek: The Motion Picture, same year. I was 1979. You know, I was 12 years old, and my mind was in a formative state. I might have seen Dawn of the Dead when I was 11, to be honest. And there was a mystique around it. I had already read the novelization by George Romero and Susanna Sparrow, which, by the way, I have right over there. And but I had read the hardcover science fiction book club version. The one I have left, I don't know whatever happened to that. I think I lost it when my dad's storage locker got flooded, and I lost about 1,000 books. All my science fiction book club books that I had collected from the 4th grade through 1987, college, and I had them. They were stored in my dad's storage locker when we moved out of our house, and there was a pipe that broke, and it just spilled all over all my books. And there's nothing that's sadder than boxes full of books. I mean, all of my science fiction book club editions. Whew, scared. Don't get me started. But yeah. I don't know why I told you that story, but anyway, JB Bonifacio says, schools closed, Tom Hanks, trouble in big banks, no vaccine, quarantine, no more toilet paper scene, travel ban, Weinstein, panic, COVID-19, NBA, gone away. What else do I have to say? Wow. Schools closed, Tom Hanks, trouble in the big banks, no vaccine, quarantine, no more toilet paper scene, travel ban, Weinstein, panic, COVID-19, NBA, gone away. What else do I have to say? Stay safe and watch your hands, Post-Geek Singularity. I hope I did right by you, JB Bonifacio. That's how it seemed to me. So thank you for that. I appreciate that. I hope my singing does not get you down. Muckbang Review sent in a super chat and says, today's songs are Erotic City and Seven, and no, you need not sing them. Read the lyrics and will cream appropriately or not. All of my purple life, I've been searching for a dream that would want to be my wife. That was my intention. I'm not going to. Anyway. Oh, seven. No, I won't do it. I won't do it. I can't read the lyrics of Erotic City. But Seven's pretty good. You know, I like, here, let me get this straight. Should I read the lyrics? All seven, and we'll watch them fall. They stand in the way of love, and we will smoke them all with an intellect and a savoir-faire no one in the whole universe will ever compare. I'm yours now, and you are mine, and together we'll love through all space. I can't. Although, yeah, thanks for that. I like that. That's a good double feature, double bill of Prince songs. Yeah, you know what? I'm going to tell you something, though. I've never loved the song Seven. I love Erotic City. By the way, Erotic City was a B-side, a 1999 B-side. One of the great 12 inches back in the day, yo. Dirty Nerdy, again, says, I really love Star Trek: The Motion Picture. It's the epitome of what Star Trek is supposed to be, the drive of exploration to learn and gain knowledge of a new life form despite the potential danger. I agree. You know, and one of the things I love about Star Trek: The Motion Picture is it is indeed full of wonder. And yeah, I mean, I love Star Trek: The Motion Picture. It's by far my favorite Star Trek movie. It feels like the logical extension of what Star Trek the TV series was going to be. And a lot of people what people don't get now is if you were a fanatical Star Trek fan, and of course I was, to sit in the movie theater for the first time and to see Star Trek: The Motion Picture begin, it was so same actors playing the same characters. It was it had never really happened before, you know. And what was interesting was, and I as much as Star Trek 2 is beloved from people, I always thought that Star Trek 2 is a huge step back from Star Trek: The Motion Picture because the scope of it is smaller. Obviously, they even use stock footage. The production design, Harv Bennett came over from the TV division. Star Trek: The Motion Picture felt so cinematic, and then all of the Star Trek movies, the classics of the classic characters, they just never felt like Star Trek the Motion Picture. They felt like you were watching TV episodes on the big screen. And even those TV episodes, like Star Trek 3, of course, Search for Spock became so small. Chance Strassner sends in a super chat and says, what did you think about 2017's Good Time with Robert Pattinson? Loved it. That's the Safdie brothers' first movie, and before they made their latest film. I loved it. Wow, the range on that kid. Can't wait to see him next year as the Bat. Me neither. Really hoping. I can't wait. I hope the new Batman is great. I'm very interested in seeing it. But I don't worry about these things. I never ponder whether they're going to be good or bad. I'm like, hey, it's coming out. Let's hope it's good. I mean, I want it to be good. I want it to be good. I want everything to be good. I hope it's good. And I think that I'd love for it to be good. I got a letter here. I'm going to read a letter. I don't have many letters today, unfortunately. Because, believe it or not, I haven't been getting any letters. I've been getting letters in. I got a few. I got one. Actually, this one, Stubble McShave, my man Stubble. Actually, this is a good letter because it goes along the lines with what we were talking about earlier. From our man Stubble. Greetings, the specialist of speculative speculation. I like that. It's like spectacular. There is perhaps nothing more important for a story to be immersive than for the world as well as its characters being internally consistent. Hear, hear, sir. For the most part, world building is only limited by the imagination of its creators. Can you imagine a world in which society as we know it has fallen and giant monsters made of metal and wire roam the earth? Fine, if you can do it. When it's done right, any world, no matter how bizarre, can be realistic and compelling for the viewer or the reader. But there is one rule above all else. One rule that decides whether you're successful in creating a fully immersive, complex environment, or alternatively creating a world that feels unrealistic and fails to make your viewers or readers feel immersed in the world and the story. The rule is that all worlds must be internally consistent. And look, modern Star Trek to me, its biggest failing is it does not feel consistent with Star Trek. It just doesn't. Being internally consistent basically means that your world doesn't contradict itself. Basically, that makes sense logically. Being logical doesn't mean that you can't have a world where things such as dinosaurs still existing. You just have to make it plausible as to how humans could evolve in a world full of dinosaurs. If you do have dinosaurs in a world with humans, how would that logically make things different from our world as we know it? Would we have cities populated with people? Or would that just attract the carnivorous dinosaurs as huge bait? One would have to think about all of the aspects of having dinosaurs and humans coexisting and to find logical answers to how the world would look. Absolutely. Consistency is what makes the awesome and extreme concepts seem realistic. Or, at the very least, believable enough to convince the viewers and readers to suspend their disbelief. When internal rules are broken, viewers and readers will notice the inconsistencies and be pulled out of their immersion as a result. Essentially, inconsistencies serve as a reminder to the viewer or reader that this isn't real, which makes it impossible to immerse yourself in a world or in the story being told. Finding the perfect premise for your world means asking, what if? Successful world building means answering that question from every possible angle and being consistent in the rules that each of those answers set up. For example, if there's a Borg transporter system in Star Trek Picard that is capable of transporting individuals over extreme distances, you must ask yourself all of the what-if questions surrounding that technology and not have any of the answers being inconsistent with the rules set up, and also not leave any logical gaps for its use. I agree. And one of the reasons that I find modern Star Trek so fucking unbelievably annoying is because there's like 10 things per episode where these things are not thought through. And I'm like, well, wait. And they're just, J.J. Abrams set the tone. We'll just take shortcuts because it really doesn't matter how we get from here to there. It doesn't matter why Khan Noonien Singh beams from his one-man murder machine like he had in Into Darkness. He beamed from the cockpit of that ship to the Klingon homeworld, which makes utterly no sense at all. And when I watch that, I'm like, why are you doing this? Why are you doing something that fundamentally undermines the entire believability of the transporter? But he doesn't think it does. So you're right. I will end this with a quote from author Patrick Rothfuss. Quote, "World building touches all aspects of your story. It touches plot and character as well. If you don't know the culture your character comes from, how can you know what he's really like? You must know your characters on a much deeper level than you would if you just shrugged your way into a cookie-cutter fantasy world. Thanks, Stubble. P.S. I'm surprised I never mentioned Wheel of Time in this letter about world building, since it's famous for being extremely good at its world building." Well, you know what, Stubble? As you pointed out, you just mentioned Wheel of Time, and if you hadn't, I would have mentioned it for you. So there you go. Yes, I agree, and it's funny that you sent me this letter, but yeah, send me more letters, man. I'm running out of letters from people. I know, it's crazy, running out of letters. But what are you gonna do? So hey, let's see where we are. Apple Crow sent in a tip, and he sends in a joke. Joke part one. Part one. Heard joke once. I know what this joke is from. Heard joke once. Man goes to a doctor. Says he's depressed. Says life seems harsh and cruel. Says he feels all alone in a threatening world where what lies ahead is vague and uncertain. Joke part two. Doctor says, treatment is simple. Showrunner Alex Kurtzman is making Star Trek now. Subscribe to CBS All Access. That should pick you up. Man bursts into tears and says, but doctor, I am Star Trek. Yes, that's of course a riff on what Rorschach told his psychiatrist, his prison psychiatrist in Watchmen. I love that you bring this up. Amartya Acharya sends in a super chat and says, have you read Picard, The Last Best Hope? It is literally episode 0 for this season. It is almost mandatory reading. It answers what happens at the Mars factory and shows what happens to Romulus. Written by Una McCormack, right? I've not. I will, because it's a hardcover book. I just, that's a problem. I feel like the show Picard has not shown us half of what they should be. It's so weird. Like the Zhat Vash, that scene with the Zhat Vash could have opened, it would have created like, who are these people? What are they doing? What did they discover? And the stuff with Rios, why, if you're going to introduce these new characters, why not go back and forth? As I talked about it before yesterday, like on Breaking Bad, you learn they have these flashbacks. They show us all this stuff. It's all this interesting stuff that goes on in the show. I feel like we haven't seen it. For a show that's very expensive, it's surprisingly there's not a lot of scope to it, which is odd to me. Simon sends in a super chat. Thank you for sending a super chat, supporting the channel. I'm a Star Trek nerd. Please explain, besides the cost of special effects, why the warp special effect changed between Star Trek the Motion Picture to Star Trek The Search for Spock. Talk about the warp field generated by the warp coils. Well, okay, basically, why did it change? Because different people were doing the visual effects. I mean, that's really what it came down to. I am with you, though. The effects in Star Trek the Motion Picture, I mean, they were rushed. And when you see them on the big screen, they're not perfect, but there's a grandeur to them. And I love the warp field effect in Star Trek the Motion Picture. Is the best warp field effect ever. They just didn't create that warp field in the same way. It's in Star Trek 3, it's like it's animated. They use a different kind of, they literally are, it was hand animation, I think. And the warp field, I mean, it wouldn't be different. You wouldn't have to say that the warp field generated by the warp coils, it's supposed to be the same warp field, I would imagine. But in Star Trek 3, let's face it, the Enterprise is a little beaten down. But I think that it's unfortunate. There's a lot of, even in Star Trek 2, there's a lot of cheapening out. There's one really weird shot they use where you see the Enterprise going through space, and it's just kind of, I don't know, it's cheap, it's bizarre. I wouldn't presume to get into the fictional aspects of the warp warp coils and the warp field effect. It was just a question of you had ILM doing the special effects for Search for Spock, and ILM didn't work on the motion picture. They used a lot of laser light effects and things like that to create those warp effects and the photon torpedoes and things like that, and they changed them. So, but it just changed because it was different effects houses. But if you want an in-universe example, I don't know if I could necessarily give one to you. I think you're just supposed to believe that, it's like when a car peels out. Every time you peel out, it's a little different. The smoke's a little different. Maybe that was the case. I don't know. Stubble McShave sends in a tip and says, I prefer the end of the battle at Helm's Deep compared to the end of the battle in Minas Tirith. It may have to do with foreshadowing. In Helm's Deep, Gandalf says, survive for 5 days and I'll save you. In the Minas Tirith battle, the ghosts aren't foreshadowed. Well, they kind of are in the extended version, but you're right. I mean, I think that the ghosts, the army of the dead, it is obviously a deus ex machina. I mean, I get that. And as we've talked about before recently, the army of the dead, it's in the book. It's not like you're going to get rid of the army of the dead, but it doesn't feel, it feels a little unearned that it's like, hey, these people, the army of the dead's going to come rescue you. I know it shows how Aragorn's leadership skills will it bodes well for his leadership skills in the future. But I always thought it was kind of like, come on, man. But I think the battle at Helm's Deep is very, I was talking about this before. Gabe, who directed Tango Shalom, was here yesterday, and he always talks about how if you watch the extended version of Two Towers, I did the piece on editorial both in the in Fellowship and on the Two Towers disc. And one of the lessons that I learned as an editor about Helm's Deep was the story that the editors talk about when they were doing the battle. As they say, the battle originally was like 45 minutes long, 45 minutes, and it was, this battle's looking kind of tasty. That's what they say. But then they realized it's a great battle, but it was boring. You got battle fatigue. And the reason that you got battle fatigue is if you're just watching mayhem, you're just watching a battle, like two sides warring, it gets boring very quickly. So what they had to do was they had to restructure the battle and tell the story of what happened to Gimli, Legolas, and Aragorn through the Battle of Helm's Deep. And once you sort of followed their progress, you became emotionally invested in the battle. So I think that's why you feel it more. Whereas in the Battle of Minas Tirith, there's so much more going on. It's much, much bigger in terms of that battle, and you're not necessarily you're following the characters, but there's not. The Battle of Helm's Deep is very contained. You understand that the Helm's Deep itself, the fortress, is you have to scale the walls and you got to get inside. It's very contained, and you understand what's at stake and how it all works. And I think dramatically it just works better, where the battle for Minas Tirith is kind of all over the place. So yeah, it really is. Amartya Acharya sends in another super chat and says, unlike Discovery, I think Picard is still working because of Stewart. At least Picard made me watch the whole of TNG, and now I'm watching DS9. Well, here's the thing. Patrick Stewart is great. He's always great. But I think that Patrick Stewart is not even allowed. I can't stand. They've barely written him anything to do. Of course, it was great seeing him with Jonathan Frakes and Marina Sirtis, and it was great seeing him in the beginning with Brent Spiner as Data. But he as a character, he has so little to do. And I've been kind of surprised that Picard, when you go back and you look at Patrick Stewart and various episodes of Star Trek, whether it was Inner Light, even Captain's Holiday, or you go back and you watch Chain of Command Part 2, There Are Four Lights. I mean, you watch all that stuff, and he was given a lot to do. And I feel that he doesn't have a lot of range in this. He just, he's almost a secondary character in his own story. And the characters that they've given us are so... how am I supposed to follow a hero that presented with some kind of emotionally charged moment when seeing Soji reminds him of the person that eventually led to the suicide of his captain, that he goes, oh, I can't take it, and goes into his room and gets drunk. That guy's a douche. I really like the actor, but if his holograms are more fun to hang around with than he is, and you show him, why do you undermine a character like that? I don't know. It bothers me. But anyway, and I'm glad you're watching Deep Space Nine. You'll like it. And Amartya Acharya asks, can you recommend some Star Trek novels? Woohoo! Can I? First of all, let me give you some of my favorite. I'll give you some of my favorite Star Trek novels. At the top of that list is Judith and Garfield Reeve Stevens' original series novel, Prime Directive. What a deliciously fun book. Right underneath that is their next book, Federation, which brings Kirk and Picard together before generations. A way better story, a fascinating Star Trek novel. The world building is incredible. I loved it. David Mack's Destiny Trilogy. 3 different books, and it is a great science fiction story. It takes place post-Dominion War in the Next Generation universe. There's a lot of backstory. There's continuity in the books, but I don't think it'll hamper your enjoyment of them. Also read his Mirror Universe duology that I wish the writers of Star Trek Discovery paid attention to, because it's great. Kirsten Byers' Voyager novels are pretty good. So if you want to read any of those novels, they're pretty good. If you want to read Diane Duane's My Enemy, My Ally and The Wounded Sky are very good. Peter David novels you should read. Star Trek books you should read. Imzadi, Q Squared, and Vendetta are all fun. So is his New Frontiers series. The Vanguard series is pretty good. Man, there's a lot. There's a lot of Star Trek books that I could recommend to you. Amartya Acharya sends in a super chat and says, I've seen the original series, Next Generation, and now you're watching Deep Space Nine. Excellent. Report back when you get done. Simon sends in a super chat and says, also in combat episodes like Balance of Terror and throughout Star Trek history, the captains would order different ship maneuvers, but I wish that we could see how the maneuvers looked, all of them. Yes, Simon, I agree with you. Unfortunately, the limitations of that kind of television was limited, so they couldn't show you as much as you might have wanted to see, which was unfortunate, because I definitely would have liked to have seen more of those, attack pattern delta, Godak, something like that. What does that all mean? There's one Sierra. Is it attack pattern Sierra? Oh my God, Evan Gerhardt sends in a super chat and says, the name for your new show, Whining About Movies. That's pretty good, man. That's pretty good. Whining About Movies. I really like that. Whining About Movies. You know what? Ding, ding, ding. That might be a winner, Evan. I got to run that by the better half. Whining About Movies. Robert and Elizabeth, Whining About Movies. Robservations presents. I like that. That's pretty good. Whining About Movies. But it would be WINEI. You'd have to make sure people knew that it was, you couldn't use an H. Whining About Movies. I like that. It's good. It's pretty good. Enjoy it. We'll see. But let's see. What was I talking about? Yes, Simon, I would like to have seen all of those maneuvers. I really would have liked that. Because who wouldn't? By God, who wouldn't want to see those things? I just, there's a lot they can't show you. But what I like about the best of the Star Trek novels is that they go into detail on these things. I mean, they really do. And that's what makes those things worth reading. They flesh out the universe so much. There's so much Star Trek world building in those novels. That's why I've liked them so much. That's why, I do in fact read them, and I think that's great. Journey's End sends in a super chat and says, "What about Michael Jan Freeman's Next Generation book Crossover? Scotty and Bones on the cover. Picked it up at a vintage bookstore. I like Crossover a lot. Crossover is a lot of fun." But it's a little, to me, it was a little a little bit more basic. I have to tell you, my favorite kinds of Star Trek novels are when the Star Trek characters and the instances and the stuff that's going on is also, they could be standalone science fiction novels in their own right, as opposed to just Star Trek novels. Diane Duane's The Wounded Sky, the Reeve Stevens Federation, Destiny, the Destiny books, broaden the Star Trek universe. Now, I liked Michael Jan Friedman is a good Star Trek writer. To me, he's not A-list. Michael Jan Friedman was, to me, a B+ Star Trek writer. Always turned in good stuff. His comic writing was good stuff. I believe he even wrote the X-Men Star Trek crossover novel, if memory serves. So I'm a fan of Michael Jan Friedman's, but I always felt that his books were B+ as opposed to A, if that makes any sense. I really do. But yeah, I like crossover a lot. But, that was, talk about a book that was fan service. It was good, though. I mean, I really liked it. There are also Star Trek novels that I shouldn't like. Like, first of all, if you want to read a killer Star Trek novel, John Ford's The Final Reflection should have been the final word on the Klingons. And there was elements of The Final Reflection that were incorporated into Star Trek. Really, really, really good stuff. So The Final Reflection is great. And How Much for Just the Planet is also something that you should read. And yeah, so those are good books to read. But yeah, I like Michael Jan Friedman's books. I just don't. He never wrote a book that would be like, oh my God, this is one of my favorite Star Trek books ever. And I always wanted him to, but I like his stuff. I mean, I have all these books, so yeah, I think those are good. Well, ladies and gentlemen, this brings me, I've got to do some rejiggering around here I've got to break down my entire computer system. And I'm going to change the Robservatory a little bit. Little changes, cosmetic changes. I'm moving my desk, believe it or not. You're no longer going to have this backdrop, so take a good look. Yeah, you'll see the new configuration this evening. I want to say thank you for being here. I want to thank my moderating staff. First of all, if you like these chats, please hit like, please hit subscribe, or as Davey504 says, slap like now. And I wish I had more base to give him. But I want to thank my moderating staff. I want to thank the Honorable Mayor Mike Bodden of Riverdale, Iowa. I want to thank Detective Jim Boyers. I want to thank the great Greg Smith. I want to thank Jordy Lyons and, of course, Louis Yu for being moderators. I hope one or two of you will be here tonight. It'll be interesting to see. It'll be a different vibe. Same kind of format, but a different vibe. Elizabeth and I will be sitting here together. We will be drinking wine, and then we will we're going to start talking about one movie. And it's going to be funny to hear what she has to say. She actually made a connection. She goes, wait a minute. Did this guy direct that movie? And then she told me something that happened in that movie. I go, yes, he did. And, I just gave away that it's a male director. Damn it. Bunyan Snipe, a wine mess. Well, I hope, Bunyan, that it's not. I don't want it to be a mess. It shouldn't be a mess. It should be fun. It might not work. This might only be a pilot that never gets picked up. We'll have to see if there's any response to it. A wine mess. I like that, but whining about movies. I do like whining about movies. I've got to come up with a graphic. I've got to make a graphic. Maybe somebody will throw me a graphic of a title. And I'll be like, there you go. I'll use your graphic. Make a thing. Make a lower third. A wine mess. I like that title, though. It was definitely than Bottle Shock. It's never like that. But anyway, I want to thank my moderating staff for being here. Please if you like these chats, please hit like. And I will, of course, be back tomorrow. And Sunday, it's just going to be raining, and I'm socially distancing myself from everyone by working on these special features for the Hills Run Red Blu-ray, which are, I got to tell you, if I said it up front, Dave did a great piece on Freddie Weidman, our great composer. It's a really cool piece. Really enjoyed it. So good on Dave Parker for that, his great work. But why should I expect anything less, considering he was cutting DVD special features for me back in 2001 and was doing a good job. So why would I expect anything less? Anyway, I want to thank you all for being here. I will be back tomorrow. I will not be on the John Campea show tomorrow because there is no John Campea show like we do during the week. He does it himself. Oh, but I am going to have a new... I'll tell you something interesting. This is sort of interesting for the people that are still here. Eric Gant sent in a super chat. He said, ever read Peter David's New Frontier books? Mackenzie Calhoun. I have a Mackenzie Calhoun action figure. I thought they were pretty fun. Yes, Eric Gant is correct. So Peter David, who wrote Star Trek novels like Q Squared, like Imzadi and Imzadi 2, although Imzadi 2 is not very good, Imzadi and Vendetta, he wrote a whole series of, I have them all, the Star Trek New Frontier series, where he created as Captain Mackenzie Calhoun and the crew of the Starship Excalibur. They're great. And what's amazing is, like, what's so interesting to me is both the Vanguard series that was written by a number of other Star Trek writers together. They wrote different versions or different books. The Peter David New Frontier series was a whole new series. I mean, Star Trek New Frontier. There it is. There is a series of books to adapt for a Star Trek series it's canonical, and you could just go make that. You could make that book series, and I mean, it would make a wonderful Star Trek series. Go do that. There it is. It's already been created, and it's good. And they were fun. You're absolutely right, Eric. They were absolutely fun. And like, why wouldn't you want to go do that? I don't know. By the way, is I can't really tell, but is on your avatar, is that piece from Wizards? I can't tell. It's I can't make it bigger. Or hang on, maybe I can make it bigger and see. No, I can't. I don't know if that's Peace from Ralph Bakshi's movie Wizards, which, by the way, I have on Blu-ray. And I actually have an animation cell. I have an original animation cell of Peace from Wizards here in the Robservatory. I do. And by the way, I'm going to start doing little videos called Off the Shelf, and the Robservatory Off the Shelf, where I'm just going to pull down stuff that's in here and riff on it, because people have asked me to do that. Why don't you pull down stuff off your shelf and talk about it? So I will, because I've got all kinds of crazy stuff that I can show you. Not just books, but there's so many weird tchotchkes in here. Like I'll tell you something that somebody's asked about this before. But so people have asked a lot about that pink Darth Vader. And I bought this Darth Vader bust because it was supporting breast cancer research. And over the course of 3.5 years, my mother had 2 radical mastectomies. And so she is a breast cancer survivor. And she had those in her late 30s. And now my mom is going to be 81 next month. She's going strong. You met her last year. If you haven't met my mom, you can meet my mom, because I did a video with her last April. I don't remember exactly what Robservations number it is, but you can see it. So I've got all kinds of interesting tchotchkes all around this place, and people have asked me to show stuff off, and that would take me forever. So I might as well. I think I'm going to do those. They won't be live. I'll just be doing videos. And what I wanted to say was, out of the blue, JBL, the speaker company, JBL, who many people might remember from when John Campea smashed his headphones on screen in a fit of rage, which was hilarious. Not, I feel bad that he was having a fit of rage, but a woman from JBL contacted him and sent him a new pair of headphones. Well, that same woman contacted me out of the blue, and they have come up with a new piece of audio-video equipment. Now, I am not somebody who is, I wasn't that familiar with JBL equipment, but they introduced at the CES show. I've never used a soundbar, and in my home theater system, I've never used a soundbar, but they introduced a new surround bar, a 9.1 surround bar that has Dolby Atmos, and it has detachable surround speakers that you can undock from the soundbar and put behind you. And it also has top speakers that fire, Atmos speakers that fire up. So out of the blue, they sent this to me. They sent me the soundbar. You can't even buy it yet. And they sent it to me, and under no obligation, They sent it to me. They didn't say that I had to do anything for it, and they weren't trying to bribe me. But I said to them, since they sent it to me, because they knew I was a home theater aficionado, I'm like, hey man, if you send me a soundbar, I'm gonna do a video. I'm gonna review it, and I'm not gonna necessarily make it favorable just because you sent it to me. And they're like, cool. So I've never really done an unboxing video on this channel. I'm gonna do an unboxing video of this new 9.1 surround soundbar that JBL has made with detachable surround speakers, which are dope. So you can put them around you, and it'll if I like it enough, I'm gonna tear out my Pioneer Elite components from our bedroom where I have my Thunder's home theater system set up that takes up a lot of room and drives Elizabeth crazy, and I might use their soundbar system, which will make Elizabeth very happy. But I have to like it. It has to impress me. So I'm going to do a video, and I'll tell you if, in fact, it will impress me. Because who knows? Maybe it will. Maybe it won't. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, this brings me to the end of Robservations episode number 360. Can you believe it? 360 people. 360 episodes, not 360 people, 360 episodes. I want to thank you for being here. I want to thank you for being my audience and supporting this channel in all ways. Write me letters, send me videos. I'll read them on the air. I'm running out of letters. And if you do, if even if I haven't read your letter, it's probably up on the website as well. So check that out. Go to the Burnettwork.net website. Everybody stay socially distanced, stay safe, and, the world will go on. We will prevail, and all that. Or as Anti-Entity said at the end of Thunderdome, we will rebuild. We don't need another hero. We don't need another way home. All we want is life beyond Thunderdome. So with that, I say every person you meet has a story to tell that you have yet to hear. All you have to do is listen. And listen you shall. If you come back at 8 o'clock tonight, and Elizabeth and I will be having wine and talking about a movie. So I hope to see you here in a few hours, and look for a new configuration of the Robservatory. Thanks again. And as always, as I like to say, have a better day.